Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman here, as always, with Tom. Tom, how's it going?
Well, Tony, I have something to tell you, and I can't see anything below your like mid torso, so I'm not sure if you're sitting down, but you may want to sit down for this. Uh, I'm going to be leaving the Buckeye Weekly podcast, and I'm also going to join the SEC. I'm very sorry to have to tell you this in front of all the nice people, but it just means more. So I'm sorry, but it has to be this way.
No, that's cool. I will, I will just go get Iowa State to co-host the show, and it'll be just as good. Yeah, no, it'll be fine. I'll get Iowa State, maybe, maybe Kansas.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Cyclone Weekly Podcast. I'm Tony Gerdeman, along with, I don't know, nice drinking water. I don't know.
Tom, are you sure you want to take on that kind of a schedule? It's a lot tougher down there.
Yeah, I'm more worried about the humidity than anything else, but that's been an issue locally as well. So I figured now was a good time to jump.
Very true, Tom. So let's talk about how this whole SEC expansion thing is going to impact college football, Ohio State, the Oklahoma and Texas handed in their letter of resignation essentially to the Big 12 today, letting them know that they will not be re-upping when the grant of rights ends in 2023, which means, or I'm sorry, 2025. So they've said that they will stay in, or they won't seek to leave until the end of this, but they will monitor the college football landscape. So, Tom, do you think Oklahoma and Texas will stick? And if they don't, they're going to have to pay like some sort of a buyout. Right now, the Big 12 buyout is 2 years of TV revenue. So you're talking between $70 and $80 million. Now, can they negotiate that down? Possibly. When Maryland left the ACC, that buyout was $52 million. They sued to get it negotiated down to 30. So even if they negotiate it down to say 45 or 50, is that something they're going to be willing to pay just to get to the SEC a couple of years sooner? Because I don't see the Big 12 trying to help them out here.
You don't see the Big 12 trying to help them out, but you also get to the point where what is the Big 12 going to look like? Because right now you have those two. There's 10 members of the league. 2 of them are now gone. You've got 8 left, and you've seen an awful lot of those team names linked to a bunch of other conferences. I think West Virginia would love to join the ACC right now, You've seen Oklahoma State and Kansas and Iowa State linked to the Big Ten. And I mean, we can talk about how realistic any of those are, but people are very clearly looking for landing spots right now. So the question is the Big 12 going to pick up a Cincinnati, pick up a UCF, pick up SMU, Houston, whoever, to try and build back up the league? Or is this league going to completely splinter and not exist anymore? Because if the league just completely explodes and you lose a couple more members, all of a sudden it's not a league anymore and there's no one to pay the buyout to. So, that's probably the best case scenario for Texas and Oklahoma. But I think there's very little chance that they pay the full amount here. And even if they do end up having to pay the full amount, you're going to make that up relatively quickly as SEC members and avoid multiple really kind of awkward, mommy and daddy are getting a divorce, but we're still living together right now, but everyone's really miserable. Like that's I would assume they're probably not going to want to do that. I think there's a very small chance that Texas and Oklahoma are really still playing in the Big 12 in 2025. I think there's going to be some kind of a parting of the ways, and it's just a question of which of the previously mentioned side doors do they slide out.
You certainly get the feeling that they know like the Big 12 is going to completely collapse once they leave, or once they announce they are leaving. And so they could just allow everything to collapse around them. And then, as you said, just kind of walk out the front door as everything is falling down around them, and there's no lock on a door to keep them from going anywhere. Nobody to pay any severance or anything like that. And we'll see what the Texas legislature and all of the politicos and the politicians can do to stop this. But nobody is jumping on the Texas A&M bandwagon of blocking these two schools. So they're not going to get any help from inside the conference. And so it's, at this point, it's certainly as close to a done deal as can be. I would not be shocked if they're in the SEC next year. I don't know the logistics of that, but it certainly wouldn't surprise me if they are then. The SEC is 16 teams next year, and then the question becomes, how do you schedule that? We've seen projections of 4-team pods, and I think that's the way you have to go. That way you can move stuff around and you can keep things fresh that way as well. And kind of like, all of the professional leagues do. Now the NL Central is going to, or the NFC Central is going to play the AFC East this year. And next year they play the AFC West, that sort of thing. So you do get to visit other schools. I think that's where that goes. Is that where you are as well?
Yeah, pods make a lot of sense to me. And I mean, I think there's a pretty good argument that leagues that are even smaller should do pods because, right now the SEC's current setup, they only play 8 conference games. And so you're playing, there's 14 teams in the league. So you're playing the 6 other teams in your conference. A lot of teams have a protected rival from the other division. Everyone has like a crossover rival from the other division. So Auburn is always going to play Georgia, and Alabama is always going to play Tennessee. And then you have the weird one, which is Mississippi State and Kentucky are going to play every year for some reason because no one else, because they were the last 2. And it's like, well, okay, guess, it's 2:00. I guess I'm going home with you tonight. Every night now, Mississippi State, clang. So so then you're only playing one team from the other division outside of that protected rival every year. So you're going, I think Texas A&M played Florida in College Station, I believe, the first year they were in the conference, and they're not going to do it again until 2027 or something under the current schedules. It's just you basically, if a team is in the other division, unless you play them in the SEC championship game, you might as well not be in the same conference. I think you look at Ohio State's schedule. It's like, boy, they haven't played at Minnesota in a while. Like, well, okay, but that's only been 4 years or something like that. I mean, it's in the SEC. You don't play other teams in your conference like for long stretches of time. So I think it makes a lot of sense to go to pods where you put Alabama in a pod with Ole Miss, Mississippi State, and Auburn, and then they have a protected out of division rivalry with LSU or with Tennessee or something like that. Yeah, I mean, one of those, and and then you're going to rotate through, and you're not necessarily going to play LSU every year. You're not necessarily going to play Arkansas every year, but you're going to play all of the other teams a lot more frequently. So instead of, going to a campus once every 12 to 14 years, you're going to go there probably every 3 or 4 years. And it's actually more like an actual conference than what they have right now.
So with Oklahoma and Texas, the 2 most coveted free agents outside of Notre Dame, and Notre Dame is not really, I guess, a free agent at this point, where does the Big Ten turn? And people immediately say Kansas and Iowa State, which that's addition just to add. It's not it doesn't move any kind of needle, and the basketball needle doesn't count. And I believe Kansas is an AAU school. Iowa State is as well. So there's that fit, which I guess we should still consider a significant thing based on the fact that there's rumblings and reports that maybe Oklahoma and Texas were looking to the Big Ten a while back, and the Big Ten was like, Oklahoma, we don't like your academics. And so if we assume that the AAU is still a factor, like that not only restricts what the Big Ten can do, but again, there's nothing east of the Mississippi or east of the Rockies, maybe even, that are in play, because the SEC, you're not going to pull a team out of the SEC. Their grant of rights is through 2034. The ACC's is through 2036. And based on what I could find, they stopped doing the buyout once they lost Maryland. And so they just said, we're only doing grant of rights. You can't buy out of it. And so I don't see anybody leaving the ACC. And again, as I've said on this show and other shows, sure, lawyers can get involved and maybe change some things. but they certainly signed that deal, agreed to that deal, thinking it would be a strong reason for everyone to stay. So if you can't get anybody out of the ACC and there's nobody in the Big 12 and you're not going to grab an AAC, you're not going to bring in Cincinnati, you're not going to bring in SMU, UCF isn't an AAU school, all that's left is the Pac-12. And that then gets intriguing because you could do pods that way. And while, yeah, you may not play the Pac-12, those two teams, however many, say they add 4, say they add 6 to make it 20, because you would need a divisible number by 4 to do pods, I would think, unless you do 3, 16 pods or whatever. But at least if you're only playing SE or Pac-12 teams like every 7 or 8 years, that's okay because of travel. It's tougher to get there. But I don't like if they're going to do something. To me, the Pac-12 is the only thing out there.
Yeah, I mean, realistically, the Big 12 teams that we've talked about, Oklahoma State and Iowa State and Kansas, like, I don't, if Oklahoma was a deal breaker because of AAU, why do they want Oklahoma's less good, not as rich, also not AAU cousin down the street in Stillwater? Like, that doesn't make any sense at all. And you don't need, Iowa State, like Iowa State's real good in football right now. That is very anomalous historically. That is not what they typically are. And you already have the state of Iowa. Like you don't need any more people in Iowa. That you have that filled, and that's not even that big a state to begin with. So Kansas, I guess of the 3, like sure, maybe if it's going to be one of those 3, it'd be Kansas. But again, I don't know if people really truly understand how little basketball matters in these conversations. Like it's like, yes, we're really good at basketball, and that's about a half a step better than like, well, yes, but our gymnastics team is fantastic. Like, well, that's great. And we're very happy for you, but that isn't what the decision is getting made based on. The decision gets made based on football because that's where the money is. And the ACC thing, I think Virginia and North Carolina would be very logical additions for the Big Ten from a cultural fit, but unless the ACC completely implodes and I don't know if you can get enough of them to be willing to scatter to different places. Maybe you get that same situation as the Big 12 where, enough teams leave and then all of a sudden there's no ACC anymore. If Clemson and Florida State go to the SEC and Virginia and North Carolina go to the Big 10 and maybe there's something there, but you're right. That is a big hurdle to clear to get those schools out of there. And you always heard about North Carolina because Jim Delaney was a North Carolina guy. And I think Jim Delaney's dream was always to get North Carolina in the Big Ten. It didn't happen under him with this terrible, terrible TV contract. Like, I mean, they have a bad TV contract right now. It is not a lot of money and they are locked in for a long, long, long time. So I think teams would like to leave because I think the ACC is not in a very good place right now, but I don't know if they can, which, yeah, you're right. It leaves the Pac-12 and, there are some real intriguing options on the Pac-12 side of things. And, you want to talk about a national conference and adding some big brands like that that's the way that the Big Ten really answers. It's not like, well, we brought in Virginia and North Carolina. Like that's not a response to Texas and Oklahoma. We brought in Oregon and USC and UCLA. And, that would be a response that would be like, okay, and now it's a power 2. It's not a power 5 anymore. It's a power 2.
Yeah, and you talked with Nevada Buck about that on Monday's Morning Scoop, and that is like a legitimate answer to in terms of clout. I don't know legitimate in terms of realistic, but it would certainly that's clout to add USC, UCLA, Oregon, and Colorado, which I think Colorado is a little bit of a sleeping giant type. Where certainly you've got the footprint, you've got the TV there as well, and it's a big enough city that there's got to be talent there. So, and they used to be good 30 years ago. So why can't they be good now, Tom? Well, maybe that's a poor argument.
Well, Colorado is one of those states that's growing. It's one of the fastest growing areas in the country right now, and Denver is one of the fastest growing cities in the country right now. And I mean, they are not a college football powerhouse, but also there's a huge historical rivalry with Nebraska there. That would be a great thing to restore. That was always a Thanksgiving weekend tradition, watching the Nebraska-Colorado game on that Friday. So, I mean, that would be big. You know, it's a growing area. It's an AAU school. And I mean, you want to talk about my level of excitement for going to road trips to Boulder and LA and Eugene, Oregon, as opposed to Piscataway and College Park, Maryland. Like, we can have those conversations, but I got to tell you, I have watching a game in Boulder has always been pretty high on my list of like, I got to get out there and do that sometime. And so yeah, in terms of covering the team and places we might get to go in the future, like, yep, I'm all for add those 4 schools, absolutely.
And the Pac-12 grant of rights ends 2023-2024. So there's there is realism there. There's a realistic possibility there. It's not something that is, a pipe dream in terms of years and money. Or Tom, should the Big Ten just sit tight and hold and let everything just fall down around them or settle around them? Because you stick at 14 teams, playoff expansion is going to be here. You'll be able to get 2 teams into the playoffs, possibly in say 4 out of 10 years. You'll get 2 teams in the playoffs. Maybe that's just me throwing a number out there. But it's an easier road. So there's that positive aspect of it. Ohio State, as we have been talking about, would probably make it any year that they want. However, you have the possibility of maybe kind of being left out a little. And we've seen the Pac-12 has become, I don't want to say second tier, but it's not in the discussion for national championships. And so you've seen talent kind of leave Florida and come east, be it to the Midwest, to the South. And does that happen then in the Midwest if the Big Ten isn't part of that? And so there's a gamble by not doing anything. But is doing something just to do something, like a Kansas State or Kansas and Iowa State? Is that, and again, we keep saying Iowa State. There's no way Iowa is going to allow that to happen.
Right. You're not adding Iowa State. Kansas State, I don't know what Kansas State brings. Kansas, like we talked about, like Oklahoma State, no. Doing something to do something is generally a way to end up doing something stupid. Well, we have to do something. That's what you say right before you do something really dumb that you end up regretting. That you want Rutgers, that's how you get Rutgers. Like, we have to do something. You don't have to do something. Adding, if you can add USC, then that's worth doing. That's your first choice. USC and Oregon and some of the schools we're talking about. And, you want to substitute Stanford in or Cal in there, like, sure. I mean, that's fine. Add in some of the, kind of like premier in some way West Coast programs. That's your best choice. Your second best choice is, maybe you can add North Carolina if that somehow works out. Like, that's probably better than doing nothing. After that, do nothing. Like, you're better off doing nothing than adding in Oklahoma State or Iowa State. I don't think you want to sit on your hands necessarily, because, sitting on your hands and watching all the other good teams get snapped up by other conferences is not wise. And the Big Ten is, probably either the first or second most desirable landing location for all these schools. It's either the SEC or the Big Ten, and it kind of depends on what you're deciding based on, because I think there's more research dollars in the Big Ten, and there's more academic prestige in the Big Ten. And based on the people who are making these decisions, university presidents, that they may actually make them more attractive than the SEC. So, and you look at the TV dollars right now, it's Big Ten, SEC, huge gap down to the other 3. So I don't think you want to sit and watch good teams get snapped up, but don't just do something just to do something, because that's how you do something dumb.
Well, and it's interesting how people keep talking about, maybe that's just because this is the world we live in geographically. What's the Big Ten going to do? What's the Big Ten going to do? And you don't, they need to survive. They need to survive, but you don't hear talk of what's the ACC going to do? How are they going to survive with this move? And so it makes me think, like, gosh, maybe the Big Ten can't survive without making a move if nobody is concerned about the ACC falling flat without a move. But that being said, the Big Ten grant of rights runs out in 2022, 2023. So if Ohio State wanted to, and I know there's always Buckeye fans out there who think Ohio State should leave, but say Ohio State and Michigan could be a package somewhere. There's it could happen. It just feels like a non-starter. Like I don't think anybody would leave the Big Ten other than maybe Nebraska just out of spite. But I don't think you leave the Big Ten to go somewhere else. I know people say there's a report Ohio State and Michigan have been talking to the SEC. Yeah, I would need to hear something myself or from one of our people at Buckeye Scoop before I would believe any of that, because just leaving the Big Ten feels like a non-starter to me.
Leaving the Big Ten, especially, I'm mad at the Big Ten right now, so therefore we should go to the SEC. Like that's like the most message board possible take. I don't think it's reflective in reality at all of how these decisions get made, why these decisions gets made, who are making these decisions. All the, we talked on the morning scoop with Nevada this morning about the AAU and why that matters. And it's like, well, why would it matter? I would much rather have Oklahoma in the Big Ten than Kansas, because Oklahoma is a much better football team. It's like, yeah, but they're not an AAU school. And that's what actually is one of the primary, Adam Rittenberg from ESPN, who's pretty plugged into the Big Ten offices, tweeted Monday, like the AAU thing is like, that's a deal breaker. That is, and that echoes what Nevada reported, that Texas and Oklahoma had talked to the Big Ten earlier this year, and Oklahoma is just a non-starter because it's not an AAU school. So it's just, I think people who are thinking, well, I don't like the Big Ten, I don't like Kevin Warren, I don't like how they handled last year, whatever. That's all well and good. That's not how this decision is going to get made. So, you never say never in this kind of stuff, but I would be legitimately shocked if Ohio State left the Big Ten, if Michigan left the Big Ten. Like that is one of the most secure, most they've been there for 100 years. It's one of the, there are, if this goes from a Power 5 to a Power 3, it's probably the Big Ten, ACC, and SEC. And if it goes to a Power 2, it's probably the SEC or the Big Ten. And, if you have 100 years of history, you have all the research money and tied up in it, you have all the academic agreements in there and, all that stuff, the prestige and whatever. There's no real reason to leave that, especially just because I'm mad about what the Big Ten did about football one fall.
Yeah, it's a short-term reaction for like long-term damage type of thing. Although Ohio State, Michigan State, Penn State to the ACC, I mean, that sounds pretty interesting, because then, that's 18 teams. Then you say, hey, Notre Dame, why don't you come on over? That's 19 teams. And then I don't know who the 20th team would be. Maybe Kansas, to help bolster that basketball for everybody. But I mean, it's fun to talk about, but I just don't see anybody leaving the Big Ten voluntarily. And as we've seen, how long has it been since they kicked anybody out? Like 80 years?
And they didn't even kick Chicago out. Chicago voluntarily left. That was in 1943, I think. So, and that was Chicago voluntarily deciding we want to de-emphasize athletics, and therefore we're leaving the Big Ten.
Nerds.
It just, yeah, exactly. Yeah, when Northwestern is not the nerdiest Chicago Big Ten school, yes. But yeah, it's just, that is just, there's no, I'm not, there's no, there was like no penalty to leave the SEC at one point. I think that's still probably true. Like, you don't actually have to pay a penalty to leave the SEC. Guess what? No one's leaving the SEC. People are like, maybe Texas A&M is going to leave the SEC. Like, Texas A&M can be as big mad as they want to about the Texas thing. Guess what? They're not stupid. They're not leaving the SEC. Same thing with the Big Ten. Like, you're not leaving the Big Ten. It is one of the few extremely secure, extremely lucrative places you could be positioned right now. And wherever you're going, there's less security than where you are right now. So, and the Big Ten also has their TV deal coming up real soon. And let me tell you, if they add USC and UCLA and Oregon and Colorado and maybe Stanford and Cal, like, you want to know how much money Texas or Fox is going to pay for that TV contract now that the Big 12 is blown up, and that would blow up the Pac-12. Like, Fox will just give them all of the money. How much money? All of the money. Like, however many Brinks trucks Fox has, they will all be in Rosemont, Illinois, saying, here, here is our money because otherwise we are out of the game.
Well, and we had the Nebraska recruiting thing a couple years back where they were recruiting California and they were calling themselves Calibraska. So if you want to be in that Pac-12 pod, there you go. Now you can just be Calibraska all day long. So as we look at this, let's look at what it means for Ohio State. And I wonder if is there an argument to be made that the SEC expansion could be good for Ohio State, because Ohio State's schedule will remain the same. They should continue to be right in the thick of the playoffs, making it most years. And until there's playoff expansion, 2 losses pretty much going to knock you out. And if that SEC schedule next year features, Alabama having to play Oklahoma and Florida and LSU and whomever, like Georgia in a championship game type of deal, the chances of having 2 losses in the SEC will increase. Of course, you would still need somebody to have 1 loss to trump that 2-loss team, or else the 2-loss team is going to go. But there's, a difficult schedule is the worst way to get to the playoffs. And so that's going to hurt the SEC. It's going to hurt Alabama. And by proxy, does that help Ohio State, Tom?
You're sort of presuming that we're staying under the current playoff format for
the next few years.
For the next few years, I think right now my money is on there's going to be a 12-team playoff in 2023. So I don't know if this really is a question that is going to play out in reality. But yeah, under the current situation, yeah, sure. More losses is bad. So I guess that's true. I don't think in reality, though, once you get to a 12-team playoff, I think you're going to have a lot of, all the best teams play in the SEC. So the SEC is going to get 4 or 5 teams in that 12-team playoff. And, Ohio State's still making that playoff every year, most likely. And, if there's 3 power conference teams and the SEC's got 4 or 5 teams in there, the Big Ten's probably getting 2 or 3. I mean, you're still probably getting multiple teams in there because you've got enough big national brands. And if teams are going 10-2, you're probably getting in there. But there's that has to be a concern. I think that the SEC has played this extremely well, setting this up with all of these teams and knowing, there was people talking about the Big 12 commissioner complimenting SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey about how he was being really considering and thinking about the best for the sport on the whole and how he laid the playoff out. And the whole time he didn't realize Greg Sankey was in the process of stealing his 2 big name teams and setting himself up with even more big name teams. And, you go through, you hear people talk about the rigors of the SEC schedule. And then you actually go through and it's like, well, who's Georgia actually playing in the SEC this year? And it's like, well, they're not actually really playing anyone who's all that good outside of Clemson. So, and, Florida, but it's like, okay, that's 2 good teams. Who else are you playing in the other 10 games? Like, well, it doesn't matter. It's the rigors of the SEC schedule. So you kind of get a little bit of credit for, stolen valor for all the wins you didn't actually have. But I'm in the SEC, so everything's impressive. So I don't think this is a good thing for Ohio State right now. If the Big Ten adds the Pac-12 teams, and then you really do have like the 2 conferences or the 3 conferences, and Ohio State is very clearly, the king of one of the 2 or 3, then yeah, that puts you in a really good, strong position, both in terms of recruiting, in terms of, playoff positioning, all that kind of stuff. But there's a couple more steps I think you'd have to get to before this becomes a good thing for Ohio State.
And speaking about the playoffs and the automatic bids and everything, we don't even know what the conferences are going to look like, how many conferences there are going to be at that point, who will be deserving of an automatic bid. So that's, if the Big 12 loses these 2 schools and anybody else jumps ship, like, are they more worthy of a playoff bid than the AAC? I don't think so. And so is there some sort of a ranking qualifier that everybody else outside of what will be maybe the Big 3 or Big 4, because the Pac-12, if they lose teams, they're not going to be any more deserving of it than the Big 12 or the AAC or the Mountain West.
Yeah, and I mean, the way the playoff thing is written is, in the preliminary proposal, again, this is not final, but it was the 4 best conference champions. So it's not the four best of the Power Five conference champions. It's the four best conference champions. So if the Pac-12 explodes and the Big 12 explodes, that could be the SEC, the Big 10, the ACC, and the AAC. I think there's a decent possibility if the Big 12 completely explodes, there's a decent possibility the AAC picks up Oklahoma State and Iowa State and Kansas and those kind of schools. And, and then like that's a respectable conference. That's a better conference than it is right now. And right now it's the sixth best conference. So you're probably the fifth best or fourth best, depending on what happens with the Pac-12, or, does the Pac-12 and the Big 12 merge? I mean, the leftovers there where you've got Arizona State, Texas Tech. I mean, like there's an argument to be made for doing that. But yeah, I think at that point, those schools, whatever the leftovers are, those schools are far from guaranteed that they're really going to be a, even if there's not an official, these are the best, you get an auto bid to the top four, like wink, wink, nudge, nudge, like, in the same way that the group of five schools are left out right now, the group of five schools are definitely going to get left out in the future. I don't know that that's necessarily the case once those lines get a little more blurred.
Group of 7, group of 8 schools?
Group of 7, group of 8, and the Power 3 sounds about right. Yeah.
And to think that the committee will look at the, for the at-larges and be like, I really think Oklahoma State has played a very similar schedule to what Texas A&M has played. So let's go ahead and side with Oklahoma State over Texas A&M because that's never going to happen. And it's going to be as much at-large of the SEC and the Big 12 and the ACC over those schools. And I just don't know how they piece it all back together for the Big 12. And they delayed their execution a while back when they were able to keep Texas and Oklahoma from leaving. But I think they still knew there's just a stay of execution. It wasn't, the verdict was not overturned. They were still all found guilty of not being that important or not being important enough.
Yeah, that has never been a good, stable arrangement at any point. It's and people will gripe about the fact that Ohio State should get more out of the Big Ten than Northwestern or Purdue or someone like that does. You look at the conferences where one team has a different deal than all the other conferences teams in their conference. Texas blew up. The Southwest Conference blew up because Texas was more equal than the other animals. And then now the Big 12 is blowing up for the same reason. Boise State in the Mountain West has a separate TV deal from the rest of that conference. Guess what? Boise State might be a Big 12 member real soon. Because there was some stuff that leaked out when Brian Harsin was still the head coach there, and he was like actively trying to get them out of the, like emailing their conference or their athletic director about, hey, we gotta get out of this conference. This is not. It's holding us back, basically.
Well, they were a Big East member for about 15 minutes.
About 5 minutes, yeah. They were supposed to be. They were going to hop to the Big East when TCU was going to hop to the Big East, and then TCU went to the Big 12, and then that completely, that blew that whole thing up. So, yeah. But when you have one team that's getting a better deal than the other teams, like it's always like, well, that's a better deal. But what if it was even better than that? There's, you're always looking for a little bit more. If the premise is like we're just going to split the pie evenly, that's what it's going to be. It sounds like that's what the SEC is going to be. There's a little more inherent stability there with that than Texas needing to be told that it's the prettiest girl there every 15 minutes, and oh no, you can't do horns down. No, that's just, it is just beyond the like. Texas is just is the perpetual turd in the punch bowl of every conference they're in, and it'll be interesting to see whether they can avoid the drama now.
Well, I sure hope not. I think those West Coast teams joining the Big Ten, if that were to ever happen, would help recruiting out west as well, because the recruits out there would now be able to stay out west and know they will have a shot at playing for the national title because you're in the right conference to do it. And you're going to get credit for playing in that conference, just like you will get credit for playing in the SEC. Other than standing pat, I don't know that to me, that's the only option is moving west. And how logistically possible is it? I asked Gene Smith on Thursday or Friday in Indianapolis about moving west and going and getting California schools, and he said it's not anything he's thought about, which, take that for what it's worth. When an AD tells you something, it's because that's what they want you to know rather than that's what they know. So, there's, and really, he also said, there's talks going on all the time, and he's not always privy to them, which also makes me, I don't know if I agree with that one as well.
Well, and that's the important thing, is this decision is not getting made at the athletic director level. So there's a little bit of plausible deniability there on Gene Smith's part, I think. But I mean, I just read an article about when Penn State joined the Big Ten, and it was from like 1989, right when that decision got announced. And it was Bo Schembechler getting quoted about how he was Michigan's athletic director at the time, and how he was caught really flat-footed by this. But basically, this is not a decision that's getting made by athletic directors. This is a university president decision. Well, this is stuff that is not, Gene Smith is not the one who's going to raise his hand and say yes or no on this. Mm-hmm. So he has a little bit of plausible deniability there. But yeah, I have a feeling that there has been more conversations about this than he might be trying to let on.
And really, if Bo didn't know about something, considering his power at Michigan, that this is going on, I think that's an indicator that, yes, as you said, it's above AD's pay grades. That's about all I had. Did you have anything else regarding this whole thing? How it affects the Buckeyes? How good, bad, indifferent? Because I don't. Certainly not good. Ohio State is Ohio State. It's negative or indifferent for the Buckeyes, is how I see it, and I don't know how indifferent it actually is.
Well, it's negative now. Let's see what it is 6 months from now. This is something where you if you end up with very clearly the number 2 conference, and now there's there's only 3, and now there's you're one of those 3 that's left, and this is coming right before you're renegotiating your TV deal. Like, there's probably you had a couple California schools, you had Oregon, you had Colorado. I mean, I've seen people talk about Utah. Utah's another area that's growing like crazy. That's another team you could potentially add in.
AAU
school, and you turn this into like a national thing, and all of a sudden there's no Pac-12 TV contract anymore. There's no Big 12 TV contract anymore. There's going to be a lot more money for the Big 10 schools. So this is right now, this is not yet a positive for Ohio State. This is right now a negative, because the SEC has made their move, and their move was a really good move. And so that then puts everyone else behind a little bit more. But hang on, don't jump off the roof just yet, because it depends on what happens next with the Big Ten. The Big Ten has some options that are potentially really, really, really good options to really position themselves well for the future. Let's see what they do. If they somehow end up with a press conference in Stillwater, Oklahoma, like, yes, at that point, jump off the roof. I don't see that happening.
Well, then you compare them, if they make this move with the Pac-12. You've got the Atlantic Coast Conference, regional. It says it right in their name, Atlantic Coast. You've got the SEC, regional, Southeastern Conference. Now you've got the Big 10, Pac-12. I don't know, is it the Big 20? Is it the Coast to Coast Conference? Because that's exactly what it is. Mm-hmm. What about this, Tom? The American Athletic Conference.
I like it. Well, and because it's such a big conference, we're going to call the number of conferences the Power 6. What do you think? Do you like it?
I think that'll work. Let's. I don't even think we need to run it through the test markets.
Perfect. We've done everyone's job yet again. Good job, us.
And as we know, everybody does listen to this show. So I think that will do it. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you for watching. A reminder to check out BuckeyeScoop.com. Camp starts August 3rd, which is a Tuesday. I will be there. I don't know if Ohio State will let us in, but I'm going. Dang it. I don't care. I'm showing up, and I'll watch from the softball stands, which I shouldn't have said out loud, but I will be there. No, I don't know. I assume we'll get invited. We don't know. We will see. And Ryan Day said there's 9 padded practices, 9 in shells, 7 in helmets for the 25 practices this fall camp. And so also check out youtube.com/Buckeye Scoop. That's all free. Go ahead and subscribe there. And if you're not yet a subscriber at BuckeyeScoop.com, I would recommend that you do that because camp is here. Stuff is going to start happening. And those of you who saw last year know how valuable the Insider Message Board membership was for keeping your sanity or helping to remove some of it. I don't know. It just depends on which side you're already on. So thank you all, and we will talk to you guys later.